Good afternoon. My name is Kent Coleman. I'm alcoholic. And my parents raised me right. I always say if my mother was here, she'd jump up and say, you ain't turned out right. But anyway, I want to say thank you to the committee for the honor and the privilege of participating in this celebration of Alcoholics Anonymous. It is an honor and a privilege to participate in the life-giving, life-changing, life-saving fellowship at any level. So I want to thank the committee for your kindness, your hospitality. I want to thank Jimmy for staying in contact with us and doing the things that a good host does, and just thank you so much. I want to thank my friend Ian for picking me up again. Ian has been my host before, picking Janelle and I up at the airport yesterday, for his kindness and his hospitality. It's great to be back in New Jersey. I've been here many times over the years, and I love Alcoholics Anonymous out here, and I love the people out here. So thank you so much on behalf of Janelle and myself for the invitation, the hospitality, and the opportunity. I want to thank very quickly the speakers who have come before me. We got here yesterday, so I didn't get to hear my friend Bobby Thursday night. Bobby is not only one of my favorite speakers in AA, Bobby is one of my favorite people in Alcoholics Anonymous. We go back a long way, and I cannot wait to listen to the CD. I want to thank Miss Ellen, who has been such she's a light, isn't she? She's a light, and can't wait to hear what she has to say as well. And then last night, my friend Charlie kicked us off with 1 and 2. And I've known Charlie for a long time. And there's people that come into your life that it is just a joy to be on this journey with. And Charlie and Katie are 2 of those people. And what a job he did on 1 and 2 last night. And then, you know, people ask me all the time, you know, how many brothers do you have? And, you know, I say, well, I had 4. My oldest brother is deceased. I have 3 left. I have my blood brother, Chuck, at home. And then there's Ralph and there's Ronald. And since the time that I met them, they like family to me. You know, and, you know, Ronnie stood up here and said, well, I'm trying to remember who said that, but Kent has a dirty mouth, right? And I'm going to tell you the truth. Yes, I said it. And it was a direct quote. That's exactly what I said. You know, I had the privilege many years ago of being in a courtroom, and for once I was not the defendant. And I was out in California goofing around, and Ronald was involved in a trial and was defending somebody. And it was down in Pasadena or somewhere like that. And I got to sit in a courtroom, and I got to watch Ronnie work. And when I left there, I thought to myself, I have never been prouder of Ronnie and what I saw him do that day. It was truly amazing. And I'm going to stand here today and tell you that I am prouder of him now than I was then. I love you, Ronnie. And then we had Debbie with Love and Service, right? And I told Debbie afterward, I said, you know, I've heard her do that many times. I get to see Debbie a lot out doing this kind of thing. And today, you know, I always ask God before I speak to grant me clarity and simplicity. And what I heard this morning from Debbie was clarity and simplicity about our other 2 legacies. And I'll tell you, we have a big book study at home, and it's much like the one that Ronald and Ralph and Strange started in Los Angeles. And it's on Wednesday night. And we start at the beginning of the book, and we go all the way through The Doctor's Nightmare. After all, it's Ohio. We do not exclude the co-founder from Akron in our book study. And after we finish that, we spend 1 month on the traditions, and then we spend a month on the concepts. And I started doing that about 3 years ago. My first sponsor used to tell me all the time, Kent, identifying the problems is easy. I don't want to hear about what the problems are. What are you doing about it? You know, it's easy to sit around and say, well, you know, they don't have the kind of sponsorship. Okay, so we all know that. So what am I doing about it? And I thought, wow, what an opportunity to share this, right, with the people in the book study. And we have, there's a lot of people. I'm not going to throw out a number, but there's a lot of people involved in our book study on Wednesday night. So it's really been cool. I always, the difference between a group and a meeting. And I always say, if a newcomer walks out of your group, and I meet them in the parking lot after the meeting, and I ask them this, what did you find in there? What would they tell me? What would they tell me? A whole lot of people who looked like they were friends and seemed to be having a good time. Some of them might have said hi, some of them might have said, hey, keep coming, while they continued on in their conversations. Somebody took my paper that I brought to the meeting and said, you can get this back in an hour. Go sit down. What would they find? And Debbie described today what would be found at a Three Legacy group. And I hope and I pray that that's what our group is like at home. Very quickly, my sobriety date is May 18th of 1992. If you're new in here, I want to share some with you. That's the only one that I have had. That's the only one that I've had. And that is not throwing shade at people who didn't get this the first time. Some of our best members, it took a long time to get this. I'm not throwing shade. What I want you to understand is that some of the things that I hear today is relapse is a part of recovery and all this kind of stuff and all this nonsense. I'm here to tell you, no, it is not. Relapse occurs as a direct result of not treating my illness with the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That is why it happens. We have a thing now, where they stand up and they reintroduce themselves. Have you had that in your area, right? My name is John Doe, and I have relapsed, and I'm back, and we all clap because John Doe ain't dead, and we're grateful, right? But after the meeting, I'll say to John, can I ask you a couple questions? Sure, Kent. Did you have a sponsor? No. Did you read the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous and apply the steps to your life to the best of your ability a day at a time and establish a relationship with a power greater than yourself? No. Did you have a home group and a service commitment in Alcoholics Anonymous, John? No. Well, I got one more question, John. What did you relapse from? We're giving people the impression that attendance here is recovery from alcoholism. It is a component of it, an important component, but walking into the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous did not relieve me of the obsession to drink and establish a relationship with a power greater than myself. Everything that we have here today has a purpose. We have meetings, conferences and conventions, workshops, literature, CDs, MP3s, the dissemination of information in Alcoholics Anonymous is at an all-time high in the year 2019. But all of those things have a purpose, a stated purpose, and that is to facilitate and help me better understand how to live the program of recovery that's described in the book. None of those things are a substitute for that. They're not a substitute for that. And when I understood that, AA started to make some sense to me when I was new. So welcome to our new friends here today. I'm going to have the privilege of talking about steps 4 and 5. And the groundwork has already been laid in 1, 2, and 3 so beautifully. It's one of the wonderful things about doing these kind of things is you don't have to go backwards. You can stay on your step. And Charlie outlined for us last night powerlessness. He talked about the obsession of the mind, the allergy of the body. And Charlie told us something else, too, that the answer is internal. It is not external. There's a line in our book that says, remind the prospect that his recovery is not dependent upon people. It is dependent upon his relationship with God. His relationship with God. When I look at the word relationship, okay, I was raised in the church. So I know all about God as I understand him. I was taught those things as a child, okay? So I know all about. But knowing about God and having a relationship with God are two different things. And I came here with absolutely no relationship with God whatsoever. What are the components of a good relationship. The first one anybody would tell you is communication, isn't it? Right? It's communication. How about trust? Okay? Faith in and belief in. And how about acceptance of? Right? The components of a successful, strong relationship. So what we're about to do now, right, is Ronald took us through the decision, okay? Every morning, I work in Lorain, Ohio, which is 25 miles from where I live in Sandusky, Ohio. Every morning I wake up, I make a decision to go to work. Now, I am not then Star Trek teleported to my office in Lorain, right? What takes place after that, right? I get up, I'll read a little something, I'll pray, take some quiet time, I get dressed, I get my coffee, get my keys, get in the car, and I drive to Lorain, Ohio. In order for any decision to bear fruit or come true or be manifested in my life, it has to be followed by some actions. What are the actions that will turn my will and my life over to the care of God through establishing and growing in this relationship the remaining steps? The third step is a promise to submit to the rest of the process. And the book goes on and tells us, though that decision in step 3 is a vital and crucial step. When I wake up in the morning and decide to go to work, that's a vital and crucial step. Okay? But it goes on to say it won't last unless it is at once followed by a strenuous effort to face and be rid of the things in ourselves which have been blocking us. So that it's not going to manifest us. It's not going to come true if I don't get out of the bed, get my keys, get in the car, and go to work. I am a very simple guy. I was brought up in Alcoholics Anonymous by some very simple people. And so I understand today what that decision means. It'll have little permanent effect, meaning it will not hold up unless it is at once followed by this action, right? So I made the decision in the third step. And I got to say something. We're talking about spiritual principles here this weekend. And if you're new in here, I want you to know something. Spiritually principled living did not originate in Akron, Ohio in 1935. Those principles are ancient. And there are millions of people out there who live like that every single day. And check this out. They don't expect a pat on the back for it either. I was 7 months sober. I went to see my grandmother. I said, Mama, guess what? She said, what? I said, I paid my bill 7 months in a row. She said, I paid mine 72 years in a row. Get out of my house. I want a pat on the back for doing what I should have been doing all along. I'm not doing anything new or unique. My Aunt Pat, God rest her soul, said to me one time, she said, you get on airplanes and you go out, what do you do when you go out and do stuff in AA? And I said, Aunt Pat, to the best of my ability with God's help, I try to help people. She looked at me and she said, that's good, Kenny. Because she done that every day of her life. I'm not doing anything new here. These principles are ancient. Right? When I was a little boy, in our house, they told us honesty is the best policy. A real man is always honest with himself and other people. In my house, maybe in your house, we got automatic butt whoopings when we got caught lying. Did that happen in anybody else's house in here? Welcome to step 1. The principle of step 1 is honesty. I learned it at the end of a hickory stick. I was 7 years old. My mother called me in the living room and she said, Kenny, she said, contrary to what you seem to believe, the sun does not rise when you wake up and set when you go to bed. She said, look out the window, what do you see? I said, I see sky, grass, dogs, cats, flowers, trees, cars. She said, you think it just popped up out of nowhere? She said, Kenny, there's a power greater than you that created all this. All you have to do is be willing to believe that, step 2. My mother said to us, if you will make a decision to turn your life over to the care of the power that created all of this, in my house they called that power God. She said, you will always have what you need no matter what happens outside or around you. The answer is inside, not outside, step 3. In our house, they told us, anytime you got a problem, no matter how bad you think it is, take a look at it, come talk to us about it. A problem shared is a problem half solved. You're only as sick as your secrets. No man is an island, right? Anybody ever hear that before? Steps 4 and 5. My mother used to say the biggest room in a human being's life is the room for improvement. There are no perfect people. If you can make B's, you can make A's. If you can do this, you can do that. And if you will ask this power to help you grow in any positive, godly area in your life, the power will always do so. That's what the power does. That's step 6 and 7. In our house, they told us anytime you heard harm or wrong, somebody else, go make right the wrong you done. You owe an apology. Make it your time. Give it your money. Pay it. Clean up your mess. That's what responsible people do. Anybody ever heard that before? Steps 8 and 9. My mother used to say, you can never go forward in this life if you don't know where you are today and what you need to work on to get wherever it is you want to go, right? Socrates, I read a book in high school where he said the unexamined life is not worth living. Step 10. And our grandmother told us when we were little boys, you want to know the secret to having a good day? Wake up in the morning, hit your knees, say one word, please. As you go through the day and you don't know what to do, right? Ask the power that created all of this for help all throughout the day. And at night, when you get back in the bed, before you do it, hit your knees again, say 2 words, thank you. Conscious contact with God all the live long day, step 11. And in my house, they told us the greatest thing we could do with our lives was not acquire money and material things. It was to be of service to God and other people. We were taught to follow the golden rule, talk to folk the way you want to be talked to, treat folk the way you want to be treated, respect your elders, and offer to share what you have with others before you have your own. Be of service to God and your fellow man, step 12. When I got on the bus to go to kindergarten, I was already armed with a set of principles, spiritual in nature, that I recognized immediately when I got here as the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, Ken, if you had all that before you went off to school, what on earth are you doing speaking at an AA event today, right? And the answer to that is very simple, right? I never did any of it, right? I talked about it a lot. It sounds really, really good, right? But it all comes from here. I want you to stay with me. It all comes from here. It don't come from here. I used to watch my mother. My mother had more faith in her little finger than I will ever have in a lifetime. My mother was one of these people. I want to read something real quick. My mother was one of these people who had this thing, who had this relationship with this power. My older brother died at the age of 16 as a result of a head injury suffered in a football scrimmage. Biggest funeral in the history of Sandusky, according to the Fowler House Museum. There was 2,000 people in that church that day. And my mother went to the microphone and my mother said, blessings will come from this. And I watched 2,000 people go like this. And you could see the light in her eyes. How do you get that? How do you get, my mother had a relationship with a God of her understanding. How do you get that? Okay. Today, starting with step 4, I'm going to start talking about the components of building this relationship. 1, 2, and 3 have been described so well. I don't have to go there. So what we're going to start with, I want to read something. And it really, it describes what I was just telling you about my mom. And it's kind of, the book is full of so many promises, right? Sometimes they just drop. In Bill's story, remember when things were darkest for Bill? And then he was like, I was soon to be catapulted into the right in the middle. And I'm like, he's dying. And now he's talking about, right, this propulsion into the 4th dimension. But there's what I want to read here right quick. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, and a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them. A whole different way of looking at life, a whole different way of looking at you, a whole different relationship with a God of my understanding. How do we get there? Well, welcome to Alcoholics Anonymous. We get there with 12 steps. We get there with 12 steps. Then we want to talk about the 4th step. So the 4th step involves some writing. And I'm going to say this right now. You know, when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I went to meetings for 3 months. I went to 3 meetings a day, Monday through Friday. I was working at Ford Motor Company. I worked a midnight shift. I went to morning meeting, noon meeting. I went to night meeting. On the weekends, I went to 4 or 5 meetings. I had a running buddy in AA. His name was John, and we ran like crazy. I had no sponsor. I read no book. I applied no steps to my life. 60 days in Alcoholics Anonymous and a couple of 100 meetings, I tried to kill a guy at work. I'm not a guy who stops drinking and gets better. See, like many of the speakers that have been up here, I'm thinking alcohol's the problem. And so I ran to these meetings. I stayed close to you. I stayed in the house, and I'm losing my mind. And I picked up a T-bar at work, and a supervisor turned his back on me, and I fully intended to see if I could put that thing through his head. I'd have killed him if I'd have hit him. And a guy ran up behind me and snatched that thing out of my hand because he saw what I was going to do. I sponsor that guy today. True story. And he said to me, for God's sake, you better go get a drink or you're going to kill somebody. That's what I look like. 60 days abstinent. No steps, no God, no service. That's what I look like. Right? 90 days, I'm sitting in the parking lot of Daly's Pub in downtown Sandusky. 90 days. I ain't had a drink in 3 months. Vibrating. Anybody know what that's like? Dude, I'm vibrating. And I'm thinking to myself, what am I, some kind of freak? I go to these meetings 3 or 4 times a day, and I'm going to drink. And I'm looking at the green door, that's the back door of Daly's Pub, and I know what's in that door. I know what's in that door. Ronnie talked about honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. I call them the triplets. All triplets have a mother. The mother of honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness in my life is something called desperation. And I sat in that car, and I didn't know what was going to happen to me if I went and did what I needed to do in AA, but I definitely knew what was going to happen to me if I walked into that green door. And I sat in that car, and I said my first prayer. 300 meetings in AA, ain't had a drink in 3 months. I ain't said a prayer. And my prayer was simple. It was, God, what am I doing wrong? And I got a lightning bolt answer. What are you doing right? If you go to that many meetings, you hear it every day. Y'all know it, don't you? Get a sponsor, read the book, work the steps, get a home group, help others, right? Just boom. I ain't done none of that. I treated AA like a cigarette smoking, donut dunking coffee clutch. So I turned the key. And that's when I took the first step. Charlie talked about it last night. There's a passage in our book that talks about the 2 alternatives. To go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the second, to accept spiritual help. That's it. There ain't no third one. And I made a decision to accept spiritual help. I turned that key, and I went and I asked for help, and I haven't looked back from that day to this. We get to the first 2 steps, right? They took me through the book. My first sponsor was a man named Bill Finley. Bill is now, some of y'all knew Bill. Bill is now deceased. He died 52 years sober. I had Bill, and I had Kenny B. in Cleveland. Kenny is now 47 years sober, and is one of the most amazing individuals I've ever known in AA, sitting around with that toothpick in his mouth. And sponsors everybody, I seem like, on the west side of Cleveland with more than 25 years, and keep 3 or 4 new guys. That's my sponsor, Kenny. Kenny got 82 years old now and looks like he's 60. You know, spiritual living is a great health restorative, isn't it? And my sponsor today is a guy named Bob who lives in Nevada, and some of you know Bob. And so I've had good help, but I'll say this to you if you're new real quick, and then we get on with step 4. Having a sponsor is a great thing. Being sponsorable is even better. All right. Somebody asked me the other day how many people I sponsor. I said, about half of them. All right, is that not the truth, right? About half of them, right? So now what we want to do is we want to identify, we come to that point now, what's blocking us? And Charlie talked about it last night. What's standing in between me and this power right now? So we want to identify, and not only does the 4th step give us the tools to identify those things, because then we're going to go on to 6 and 7, right, and continue with the process. Not only identify them, but it begins to give me some relationship building tools that will bring about this change, the ideas, emotions, and attitudes suddenly cast to one side. How does that happen? Well, we're given clear-cut directions to do that, and we're going to see that now. So we start with resentment, the number 1 offender, right? And it asks us to put some things on paper. We got some columns here: resentful at, the cause, and affects my, right? So we start filling these in, right? Now, this is what I was told before I write down anything. To get on my knees, say the 3rd step prayer, and then ask God to reveal for me everything that needs to be in this inventory so that I can proceed with my recovery. I was not told I had to write a 400-page essay. I was not told I had to tell everything that ticked me off since I was 2 years old. I'd still be writing, right? I was told, read the black print on the white page in the blue book and do what it says. My sponsor was Neil C. in Cleveland. Neil's sponsor was Dr. Bob. Dr. Bob took Neil through the steps. Neil never opened the book. He would tell Neil to go do something. Neil would say, okay. And then Dr. Bob would look at him and go, that's in the book, Neil, right? And that's how Neil was taken through the steps. It was not a college course. It was not some deep intellectual. It was move your feet. Recovery's in your feet. It ain't in your head and it ain't in your mouth. It is in your feet. Move your feet. So I sit down and I did the prayer. And you know, like a lot of new people, you know, I heard a lot of things in meeting that confused me, right? I love the line in the book that said, no one like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, and the confession of shortcomings that the process requires for a successful consummation. What that means, if you knew, don't nobody want to do this in the beginning, right? Nobody said, oh boy, I can't wait to write that inventory, really? Go get that guy to help you, I don't know. Right? So nobody wants to do that, right? Nobody wants to write that. So we get to this fourth step. So I say the prayer, and I wrote and I had gathered up a bunch of worksheets, and some people gave me workbooks, and I had like a stack of stuff like this, and I was sitting at this table in my mom and dad's family room, and I'm just like, what is all this? What does this mean, right? So I went to a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's usually where I get my answers. And there was somebody at that meeting. Guess what? The topic was step 4. And there was a lady at that meeting. Her name is Mary. Mary's still sober today. And Mary said this. They ain't said nothing to me, and I ain't said nothing to her. Mary said, you know, when I was new, I gathered up a whole bunch of workbooks and worksheets and really confused myself. And my sponsor said, throw that stuff in the wastebasket where it belongs. Get out the book, read the black print on the white page, and do what it says. I got my answer. I went home, I threw all that stuff in the trash. I made me some lines on the paper. I got on my knees and I started writing. I wrote my inventory in one day. It was a long day. I wrote most of the day. Wasn't a pretty thing, but like Tom I used to say, best piece of work I ever did in my life. And I wrote down the resentment. I wrote down, the first 3 columns in inventory were pretty easy for me because I always lived like that. I was always taking your inventory. Right? I knew who I was mad at. I knew why I was mad at you. And poor me, I knew how you had affected me. Right? But see, the concept of inventory is not new to me. When I retired from Ford, I was material control advisor for service part distribution in North America. Today, I'm master scheduler and master planner for Cameco Automotive. We make seat frames for General Motors and for Ford. Inventory has been a part of my life for the last 20 years on a daily basis. When I go to work Monday, when I walk into my office, laying on my desk will be inventory that has been taken since I was gone. So the purpose of inventory, and the book talks about the commercial inventory. The purpose of inventory is what? We talk about identifying damaged and unsaleable goods, getting rid of them promptly and without regret, 6 and 7. Right? Getting rid of them properly without regret, so that we can have at our disposal the things that are useful in our lives. Okay? So I want to identify those. So this concept was not new to me. I understand inventory. So I wrote down all of that. There's those first 3 columns. And then they asked me to do, now some people call it the 4th column, right? The way I was showed to do it, just number it. And if you want to put it in the 4th column, who cares how many columns? I've heard debates on this, waste a whole AA meeting. My book only has 3, but y'all talking about, who cares? If it make it easier for you to see, I tell my guy, just put it right next to it. That's a 4th column. Who cares? Listen, if I come over your house and you fix some cake, if I come over to Charlie and Katie give me a piece of cake, and I eat that cake, I said, Katie, that's the best cake I ever had in my life. Katie said, well, look, Kent, here's the recipe. Follow this exactly, you'll get the same cake I got, right? And so I go home, I take a look at Katie's recipe, and it says 4 eggs. Well, I really like eggs, so I'm going to put 6. 2 cups of flour. Well, I think 1 should be enough, right? 1 cup of sugar, I really like sugar. Let's put 3, right? I get a different cake. I get a different cake. Rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. If I alter the content, I will alter the result. I'll alter the content, I will alter the result. So I did it exactly the way the book asked me to do it. And so then we come to the page where it tells us, now we're going to look at our behavior in this thing, right? And it asked me some questions. It said, though a situation had not been entirely our fault, we tried to disregard the other person involved entirely. Where were we to blame? The inventory was ours, not the other man's. When we saw our faults, we listed them. We placed them before us in black and white. We admitted our wrongs honestly, and were willing to set these matters straight. That is what I had never done. My position was I'm right and you're wrong. When I was 14 years old, I had an epiphany in study hall one day. I looked around the study hall and I thought to myself, these people in here are trying to break their neck getting B's and C's, taking general math and science. I'm in the 10th grade. I'm taking calculus, physics, 4th year Latin, and 4th year English. I'm sleeping in class and getting straight A's. You know, it just might be entirely possible that I know everything. Now, y'all laughing because y'all know what I'm talking about. I have a new position, and it repositioned my relationship not only with God but with you. I went home and told that to my mother and father. I thought they ought to know. You know, I was scared of my father. My father was a master sergeant in the United States Army. My father was in the woods. My father had every medical accommodation you can give somebody in the service. My father was also a great athlete, and my father played football for West Virginia State University when they didn't have face masks. I was scared of my father. And when I made that statement, my father flinched like he was going to jump up off that couch. And I made a split-second decision not to wait and see what he wanted. And I broke for that screen door, and I got out, and he was right behind me, too. And my father looked through that screen and he told me something. He said, boy, I'm going to tell you something. He said, Kenny, you're going to have a hard life. Don't nobody know everything. And I looked my father dead in his eyes and I laughed in his face. And that was a significant day in my life because I changed my position that day. From now on, it ain't my fault. I am a victim if anything goes wrong. Anybody know that position? I am a victim, right? I got the police. It's their fault. Right? They was number one on my reserve. Everybody said, Mom and Dad went up. No, mine was the police. They was number one on my hit parade, right? Arrested me, harassed and threatened me, blah, 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 blah. Ate lunch outside my house. They used to park outside my house and eat their lunch. They like to sit across the street and take pictures of people coming in and out of my house. People would walk in my house like this. Well, I hated the police, right? Where was I to blame? I broke the law on a daily basis. I was a criminal. Now, I've been a member of Alcoholics Anonymous for 27 and a half years. I have not had a drink of alcohol. Police ain't been in my house one time. As my alcoholism progressed, and I was a guy who, you know, a lot of people, like, it's a progressive thing, and they start drinking, and they talk about having fun, and then fun with problems, and then just problems, right? It accelerated for me very quickly. I got in trouble. I got grounded for life the first time I got drunk. I got grounded. If this here was a drink of alcohol, and I stood up here and took a drink, a cop would drop right out of that light and land in the middle of this floor. Yeah, drink trouble, dude, really? Right? But it's always somebody else's fault, and it is never the fault of alcohol, because alcohol is an answer for me. Alcohol ain't a problem. Alcohol is ease and comfort for me. Alcohol is what makes me breathe. Alcohol is a social lubricant as far as I'm concerned. It allows me to be and to do and to say things I can't be, do, or say without it. Alcohol was an answer for me the very first time that I picked it up. Right? And so I began to construct around me. I read something one time where a guy said, you know, in your subconscious, it almost works behind your back, and it begins to build a wall of justification and defenses against the truth. And that's what started happening to me. And so I come in Alcoholics Anonymous, I got this wall around me. I've assigned blame to everything that's gone on in my life. I got all this stuff going on with me. And so now what you're asking me to do is you're asking me to get rid of it. If you're new in here, the program of recovery is not about addition, it's about subtraction. This is not about acquiring knowledge and intellect. This is about removing those things that stand in the way of me and my relationship with God and with you. This is about removal. It's not about addition. I love the story about Michelangelo when he carved a beautiful statue of the angel, and the guy said, man, how could you do something like that? How can you take a plain block of marble and do something like that? And Michelangelo said, it's easy. I simply chipped away the pieces that weren't David. And what we're doing in here is we're removing those things that aren't us so that we can be free and we can live in the sunlight of the Spirit. So I get all these resentments down. I get that fourth column down, right? And so I got all this information on paper. I really wish that we could get out a board and get into the fourth, but I don't have time to do that. But I want to talk about some tools now that are given us. We talked about building this relationship. We talked about this change. Dr. Silkworth talked about this psychic change. And he said something more than human power is needed to produce it. I talked about what I saw in my mother. I talked about what it says in the book, how about ideas and emotions and attitudes are changed, right? And you see that change happen in people in here. So let's take a look at some of the first tools that they give us. And let me get back to my page. Okay. On page 66, it starts talking about, we turn back to the list, for it held the key to the future. Now we're going to start to get some relationship building tools. We were prepared to look at it from an entirely different angle. So what angle am I going to look at these first three columns at now? It said we began to see that the world and its people really dominated us. In that state, with me believing, right, what I'm believing, the wrongdoing of others, fancy the real, had power to actually kill. It has power to actually kill because it's going to keep me blocked from the sunlight of the Spirit. How could we escape? We saw that these resentments must be mastered, but how? We could not wish them away any more than alcohol. This was our course. Now it's going to tell us how to do that. We realized that the people who wronged us were perhaps spiritually sick. And you notice how it says perhaps? Because a lot of these people didn't do nothing but react to what I did. Does everybody get that? Right? But there's going to be some people that I'm going to encounter who are spiritually sick like me. And it goes on to say, though we did not like their symptoms and the way these disturbed us, we didn't like what they did, right? We see that in the second column. They, like ourselves, were sick too. How many times have I talked to a sponsee who's got a resentment against somebody for something that they did, right? And I'll listen. And I love the way Debbie talked about listening. One of the things Bill told me when I was new, he said, Kent, there's a big difference between listening and waiting for your turn to talk. A big difference between listening and waiting for your turn to talk. Right? I talked to one of the most successful men in Ford Motor Company one time. I worked for him. And I said, man, how do you get a seat like yours? And he said, it was easy, Ken. I learned how to listen to the people who work for me. And I knew on a daily basis what I need to do. He said, son, you got to learn how to listen to the people who work for you. And that's where I started learning. But it all started here. Okay? It says, now, they like ourselves were sick too. Okay, so we in the same boat. I've attended AA meetings where I hear people say, anybody got a topic for discussion? And then somebody will go, yes, resentment, right? And 9 times out of of 10, right? So then they go around the room and everybody shares how they had it. And you hear stuff like this. Pray for them for 2 weeks. Well, ain't never wrong to pray for somebody, right? But is that what our book tells us? No. That came from a story in the book, and if you read the whole story, that lady said, I had a boatload of resentments, and every one of them responded to the treatment outlined in this book except for one. She had a deep-seated thing. She took it to God. God answered the prayer. So this, I used to always, again, I'm right and you're wrong. And this was my position, right? So what you're asking me to do now is to shift my position, because I'm like you. Stay with me if you're new. So I would pray for people. Yes, John Doe is sick. God, you need to help him, right? Like I'm better than him, right? So what it's asking me now is to come down from this seat of judgment of another child of God to here, to a position of empathy and connectedness. I am like you, okay? We ask God, how many times in the book does it say this? What we're talking about now are the tools that are going to begin to affect this conscious. Charlie said something last night, hit me right between the eyes. Charlie read some out of the book, and Charlie said, am I doing it? Am I doing it? It is really nice to walk into a meeting and quote the book and wax poetic and then go home and raise holy hell. And I ain't saying I'm above going home and raising holy hell. I'm a human being. But you get what I'm saying. This is not theoretical. This is experiential. And until I start doing it, nothing is going to change. Nothing is going to change. I am going to continue to progressively get work. And then I'm going to be continually going back to my sponsor. So people come and they ask me for help. And some of these people got 25, 30, 35 years, and they're in trouble, right? What I always tell them is this, okay? We know that if applied to the best of our ability, what is in this book, it'll work pretty good, right? You are way off the beam here, okay? So I'm not going to ask you what it is you're doing, because you just told me it ain't working. So let's not waste our time with that. Let's sit down and let's figure out what you're not doing. What you're not doing. And that could land in a whole lot of different places. So one of the things that the book starts asking me to do when these things start cropping up, stay with me, is to turn to God. Is to turn to the power. And so these are prayers that it's giving me. And this is not a morning prayer and a night prayer. These are prayers to be applied all throughout the day as these situations present themselves. So when somebody offends me, ticks me off, here's the prayer. We ask God to help us show them the same tolerance, pity, and patience that we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God, save me from being angry. Thy will be done. So now I'm given an action to take in the form of a prayer, okay, to help shift my position from one of anger, judgment, okay, confrontation, to a position where I can be helpful to this person. Pull into the mall and beat somebody to a parking spot, and they get out of the car and cuss you blue. And you know that the reason they're cussing you has nothing to do with a parking spot. You just became a convenient dumping ground for all the stuff that they got going in. And you say the prayer, and you get out of the car, and you say, hey, it's okay, you can have the spot. Watch what happens. Watch him go like this. No, man, it's okay. It's okay. God, shift me so that I stop reacting to life and am positioned to be able to see and serve you. Because now what I'm talking about is I want to change. And I can't change just by reading and memorizing a book. I actually have to start putting these things into practice. And I'll tell you, there's days that you could follow me around. If they put candid camera on me, and some of y'all ain't old enough to know, too young to know what candid camera was, but some of y'all know, right? If you put candid camera on me and followed me for 24 hours, there are days you would never know that I've been in one of these meetings, right? But what happens in here is those days just get further and further apart. We make progress in here. And I'll tell you something. Spirit and things that happen in spirit are hard for me to verbalize. But there's a joy of living. There's a peace of mind. There's a contentedness. There's a sense of purpose that comes from doing this that are quite frankly beyond. You have to do it in order to experience it. This is experiential. So I have a tool now. I have a prayer. We ask God, how many times in this book does it say we ask God? The message here is when these situations occur, we turn to the power because we made a decision in step 3 to turn our will and our life, our thoughts and our actions over to the care of God. It is awful hard for me to access God without God. Because theoretically, I know that's what I'm supposed to do. I've known since I was a kid how to react in a moral way. Right? What does moral mean? Relating to right and wrong as it pertains to human behavior. I was raised properly. Right? And this has made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So it starts asking us to take a look at how we are reacting to life in a right or wrong way. Does everybody get that? Yeah, in a right or wrong way, how am I reacting to life? Right? We avoid retaliation or argument. We wouldn't treat sick people that way. If we do, we destroy our chance of being helpful. What is our purpose? To be of maximum service to God and the people around us. The old timers in Cleveland used to say, do no harm. Do no harm. Did you do any harm today, kid? Do no harm. We cannot be helpful to all people, but at least God will show us how to take a kindly and tolerant view of each and every one. Love and tolerance is our code. Love and tolerance is our code. Okay? At what point am I willing to stop allowing the world and its people to dominate me? Because after the third step, all of the actions that it asked me to take, the prayers that asked me to say, the things that asked me to do, the places that asked me to go, right, are based on that decision. Have I really made that decision? I vocalize it to God in the form of the third step prayer every morning before I leave the house. But when the rubber meets the road, what am I really doing? This is why sponsorship is so important to me. Because sometimes when you're in the picture, you can't see the picture. And I have a mind that will still try to rationalize and justify things that are not correct. And I will still get angry with people, and I will still react badly to things. And I will still make decisions based on self, like Ronnie talked about, that will place me in a position to be hurt. And I need to be accountable to somebody. Somebody got to know what I'm talking about. We'll get to that in step 5 in a little bit. Then we go on to fear. Fear is the enemy. God is not the author of fear. I used to hear people say, well, there's healthy fears. I got a fear of walking in traffic. No, that's common sense. God gave you that to preserve you. The book says fear is an evil and corroding thread. My question to you, and this I won't even put it as a question. The God of my understanding does not create evil and corroding. Fear is not of God. It asks me to list my fears. What is that fears list? The fears list are the places where I've given fear access to my life. Fear cannot enter my life unless I open the door. And when it comes, as was read here earlier, what does it ask me to do? Turn to God. We ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be at once we commence to outgrow fear. Do you see how this change is going to take place? It isn't going to take place because I have 20-some years of sobriety. It isn't going to take place because I've read and memorized a book. It will take place by the utilization of the tools that it's given us. That's how this change takes place. What's that old saying? You can't think your way into a right way of living. You got to live your way into a right way of thinking. My mother used to talk about the renewing of the mind. The renewing of the mind, the change in thinking. What does the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous say? The problem of the alcoholic centers in his mind rather than in his body. Charlie said it last night. You treat the spiritual, the mental, and the physical will follow. Everything, the book says the financial, everything will follow. Everything will be a reflection of my spiritual position. Where am I positioned spiritually? Everything in my life is going to be a reflection of that. And why do I have these fears? I'm going to tell you why I had these fears. Bottom line, it's really, really simple. Because I don't trust God enough. I would love to stand here and have a bragging rights and say, oh yeah, I trust everything. No, I don't. But I got some tools to use that will turn me back to God, and then if I will use them, God will answer the prayer, God will remove the fear, and He will direct my attention to you. Because that's what He would have me to be. He would have me to be love and service in your life, what Debbie was talking about. God will redirect me to you. I used to call my first sponsor Bill, and I'd give him a rundown of my fears and grievances for the day. This was on a daily basis. And he would always reply the same way. He'd say, who you helping? Who am I helping? Apparently you ain't listening. This is not good, right? And I'd run it down again. And he would say to me, who are you helping? Click. Conversation just ended. And when he hung up, you didn't call him back. I learned that the hard way. Direct my attention to what you would have me be. Okay? I could stand up here and tell you today, I trust God with everything and all of this, right? But at 3 o'clock in the morning, when you're worrying about something at work, when you're worrying about paying a bill, when I'm worrying about my kids, okay? I have to turn to God. I have to turn to God. I have to give it to this power. What is my conception of this power? It's so easy for me to stand up here and say, God has all power. God created all. It's easy to say that. But at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I'm wondering if the plant's going to close and what's going to happen to me. And I'm wondering where my children are and what's going on in there at 3 o'clock. Is everybody with me? Okay. But I've been given, the beauty of this book is its wholeness in its totality. Quite as important was the discovery that spiritual principles would solve all my problems. Is that not the greatest promise in the book? I have to turn to God. So I've listed my fears. Okay? The book says we ask ourselves why we have them, right? And then it goes on and it answers the question for you. I don't have to write that down. It tells it for you. It's very, very simple. It's because I'm trusting in my finite self instead of infinite God. Right? To this day, when I am confronted with a problem, after being here, this amount of time, after working with hundreds of people in Alcoholics Anonymous, maybe even more than that, I don't know, I don't count. When I'm confronted with a problem, my first reaction is still this: what do I need to do about this? It's always been our first thought: what do I need to do, right? And if you scare me bad enough and I don't bring God in the picture, here's what I will do. I will decide, well, God ain't doing nothing about this, so, and I don't care about it, so maybe I better get involved in this. I will then start to try to control and manipulate what's going on outside and around me. Here's what will happen. This is my experience. What's going on outside and around me will not cooperate because I'm playing God and I ain't God, right? I will then become resentful, angry at them for not doing what I want to do, or I will suffer from guilt, shame, and remorse for my behavior, right? And all this stuff will start to reoccur again. Is everybody with me? Okay? So that's what happens to me, right? When I don't trust God. So it's for me, it's a 24-hour-a-day thing. I only live in this day only. Old timer told me one time, take the square on the calendar, write trust God, clean house, help others, and forget the rest of the squares on the calendar. And do the best you can with the tools that God has given you within this 24-hour period. I can only live in the day that I'm in. Yesterday is gone. I may not be here tomorrow. If I can just do it 24 hours at a time. It's crazy how things, as you stay here longer, take on new and deeper meaning in my life. And today I understand that I can only... Hey, everybody in this room, I want you to live 10 minutes from now. Go! Only right here, right now, this second. Who in here right now is worrying about that car note? Who in here right now is wondering what's going to happen with your kids? Who in here right now is worrying about going to court next week? Right? We ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what He would have us be. And what has happened in my life and in my experience is that I don't have that undercurrent of fear that runs constantly in me. I do get afraid when things come up, but I will go to God. I will go to my sponsor. God has a way of giving me the answers and giving me the love that I need to get through whatever it is. All of the things that I was afraid were going to be the end for me, right? Sobriety is not an absence of the vicissitudes of life. It's not an end of... My friend Butch in Toronto always says, if you think you ain't going to have problems in here, you better buckle up. You better buckle up. Because what comes to your next door neighbor's house is coming to your house. Right? Sickness, death, job issues, money, right? It's all coming. You're going to get sick, other people are going to get sick, people are going to die. Life going to continue to be life. But all of the things, when I got sober, if you asked me, Kent, what do you fear the most? I would have said losing my parents. Because I didn't have the tools to deal with that. I was scared of that when I was drinking. I would have told you that. I stand here today and tell you that sober in Alcoholics Anonymous, I laid my mama and my daddy to rest in here. And I was okay with it. And I had peace that my mother used to say passes understanding. And it's all because of God, and it's all because of you sharing your experience and sharing this program with me. Right? All the things that I thought were the end. This has been with me in sobriety. Probably last week I had something I thought was the end, right? And you know what you do. You go to your sponsor, you pray, right? You go help another alcoholic. It passes, and now it's a week later, and I don't even remember what it was. It was the end of the world last week, right? It's crazy how this thing works, right? And then we move on quickly to relationships. Some call it the sex inventory. And what it is, selfishness and self-centeredness is the root of the problem, right? Then obviously unselfishness is the root of the solution. So it gets me to take a look at my past relationships. It gets me to take a look at some questions on page 69. We reviewed our own conduct over the years past. Where had we been selfish, dishonest, or inconsiderate? Whom had we hurt? Did we unjustifiably arouse jealousy, suspicion, or bitterness? Where were we at fault, and what should we have done instead? We get this all down on paper and looked at it. right? And so we get this down on paper. The way my sponsor had me do it, and I don't know where yours had you do it, but he had me write down a name, right, and then answer those questions, right? And so as I began to write, by the time you get to about the third one, you realize you're writing the same thing every time, don't you, right? And so now I see the root of the problem, right? If the root of the problem is selfishness and self-centeredness, I need to get a new root system. I need to get a new root system. Some of y'all old enough, some of y'all from the South, you know, might not be down there now, but you're from down there. My grandmother from the South, and she would go down to Miss Maggie's house up the street, and Miss Maggie had a beautiful garden, and so did my grandmother. And my grandmother would tell Miss Maggie, I love those right there. Miss Maggie said, get you one. And so my grandmother cut it, and then she'd bring it home, and she put that stem in that mason jar in the kitchen window. And then you watch those roots start to develop, right? And once that root system is strong enough, we plant it in new soil. What did Bill say about Ebby? His roots grasp a new soil, a soil of honesty, of open-mindedness, of willingness. I plant these new roots. That does not mean I'm not going to have problems. It doesn't mean I'm not going to make mistakes. But my roots grasp a new soil, so they now produce a different fruit. You can't grow apples on a lemon tree. The roots have to change. So we're getting rooted. If selfishness and self-centeredness is the root, we're getting rooted in unselfishness. What is it that our book prepares us to do? What does our program prepare us to do? To be of maximum service to God and the people around us, right? To be of love and service to others, just like we heard this morning. Now we have some prayer, right, to apply during the day when these relationship issues occur. And there's a couple of them, but they're summed up on 70. We earnestly pray for the right ideal and for guidance in each questionable situation, for sanity and for the strength to do the right thing. If sex is very troublesome, we throw ourselves the harder into helping others, right? Selfishness, self-centeredness, the root of the problem. Unselfishness, the root of the solution. The book continually takes me back to the answer. Am I doing it? Am I doing it? I have guys call me, they've had the same issues going on for 7, 8 years. Anybody got sponsors like that, right? And I'm like, I'm not discussing this. We've already looked at this. We've inventoried it I don't know how many times. I'm not listening to it again. Have you applied the solution? No. Well, what do you expect? What do you expect? I don't have a magic wand over here to wave over your head. We have an answer. Boy, in getting this down on paper and seeing what I've put in my life, how I've surrounded myself with all this stuff, I was really not excited about going further with this, because these were my comforts. These were my comforts. I am a relief-seeking missile. Right? So now I'm looking at how I've tried to manipulate the world around me, right, to give me ease and comfort. Not just a drink. That was the first one, right? But now I'm physically sober. So I'm looking at the way that I've used people, I've used places, I've used things to validate this vision of who and what I think I am and what I need to have. When I look at security in that third column, security is what I think I need to be okay. What is it that Kent's ego has decided he needs to be okay? He needs to have a certain job, he needs to have a certain girl, he needs to have a certain car, right? Kent needs to have this many college degrees, Kent needs to have all this stuff. I've constructed all of these things to replace God in my life. And none of them ever work, because nothing's ever enough. And now I'm identifying those things, and pretty soon, the book said, and to be rid of them promptly and without regret, we're heading towards step 6 and 7, and I know it. But this is about removing those things. This is about unblocking those things, right, that are blocking me from the sunlight of the Spirit. Without the sunlight of the Spirit, I will remain insane and I will drink again. So, like, it's not, as the book said, you know, few of us like to do this, but we saw the results of it in other people, didn't we? Ronnie talked about the credibility of people standing behind these podiums. I heard people stand behind these podiums and tell stories Stephen King couldn't make up. You know they ain't lying. You can't make stuff up like we do. Yes, I was involved in a head-on collision with a police car. And when I got out on my own recognizance, they offered me a ride home, and I said, would you take me back to the bar? You can't make that up. You can't make it up, right? But I saw you. I saw the living example of people who did this. I was surrounded by you. Where I come from, and I know it's not this way everywhere, you cannot go to a meeting where I come from where this book ain't on the table. You cannot. You cannot. I was surrounded by people who were living this way. My home group spun out of an Oxford group meeting. And in the area that I live in, between Cleveland and Toledo, and there's thousands of meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous. And sometimes I would try to escape what I thought was my sponsor's radar zone. I went all the way to South Africa and they asked me about them, so that wasn't possible, right? Toledo wasn't far enough. And people would say, who's your sponsor? And then I would tell them, because I know there's no way that they would know who he was. And they'd say, no, we know him. He comes here every year, and he didn't teach you that. What's the book say? Right? I've just been surrounded by this book, and I'm very grateful for that. So I got these tools, right? I've written this inventory. So now I got this information down on paper, but I'm also armed with some more tools to start applying on a daily basis. That resentment part, that ain't to help you get rid of resentment. That's so you can start to how to live and not get them. That's how you stop being the way you were. It's not like you're not gonna, because eventually you will, but you understand what I'm saying. We're moving toward that consciousness that my mother had. See, I didn't understand how you get that, and she couldn't explain it to me. God rest her soul. But she lived like this. She didn't have to read this book or have a sponsor. She didn't have an alcohol problem, but she understood spiritually principled living. Her voice rings in my head every day. Every day. My God says, supply all your needs. She told me that when I was a little boy. Admitted to God, to ourselves, and to another human being the exact nature of our wrongs. Alcoholism for Kent is a disease of isolation. I drank with guys that I had known since I was 3 years old when I went to preschool. I knew these guys all my life. They didn't know me, and I didn't know them. I only allowed people to see in me what I wanted you to see. My sense of self was predicated on what I think you think about me. My friend Ralph say I was all front and no back, right? I mean, and that's, I'm an empty shell of a human being. So no one knows me. I don't tell anyone. In the last year of my drinking, I'm going to tell you this real quick, I used to write inventory. And I was still drinking. I didn't know what it was. I was living in a house that had no utilities, no running water. It wasn't a house, it was a spot. I lived like an animal. There were beer cans this deep. My cousin told me later after I got sober that she came by there with my mom one day. And it was wintertime, and the door was knocked off the hinges. I only had a screen door. The drug task force knocked it down, and I figured they'd be back, so I never put it back on. That's a true story. And she said that your mom stood and looked in the screen door, and she said you was laying on the couch. And she said, Kenny, there was beer cans 2 feet deep all over the room. And she said your mom just stood in the door and cried. Well, I ain't hurting nobody. That's why I don't really go around talking about how much fun I had drinking. Guy said to me one time, his name was Jim Redmond. He died 55 years sober. Jim Redmond said to me one day, "You had a good time, huh, kid?" He said, "Well, get your mother, your father, the girl you live with, your next door neighbors, your employer, and your creditors in here, and let's ask them what kind of time they had." I am so selfish and I am so self-centered. There is something in me that wants to somehow justify looking at this thing in a positive light. It wants to plant that seed in me, and it just wants to leave it there, because maybe if I leave it there long enough, it'll germinate. From the day I picked it up to the day I put it down, just like Bill Wilson, I got progressively worse. And so did the lives of the people around me. It didn't touch. The book said it engulfs the lives of those who touch the sufferers. Engulf doesn't mean tap them on the shoulder. I took a lot of people for this ride, this spiritual, oh my God, it just drains people's spirit. It compromises people's spirit. It bleeds over into every aspect of their lives. And I'm sitting up at night living in this spot, and I'm writing letters to my best friend from college who was a doctor and who later would be the man who put me in treatment. And I'm writing down the truth about my life, and I'm writing on this paper, "Rich, everything I'm telling you is a lie, man. It's not true. I'm not doing good. I'm dying up here, and I can't stop it, and I don't know what to do, and I don't know where to go." And I would pass out drunk, wake up, read it, be horrified that I'd written that, rip it up and flush it down the toilet. That's what I did my last year drinking. So no one knew me. And I sat down with my sponsor, and they told me the only thing you can do wrong in the fifth step is lie or purposely withhold something. And I thought to myself, well, he's kind of old. When I drop this on him, he may keel over. Let me check my CPR skills out, right? And if anybody knew Mr. Finley, he started sharing with me, and I almost fell out. Right? And there was a freedom that I felt when I left there. And I had a bond with another human being, and I've had it with a couple more since. One of them sitting here, I've had that with other people, where I could just be me, with all my flaws and all my defects and everything that's wrong with me, and there ain't enough time in this weekend to list them all. And I can just be me, and he loved me, and I loved him, and I loved Ronnie loved me, and I've had that with other people, and I'm not alone anymore. I can share with my sponsees my experience, strength, and hope. I ain't got to hold nothing back. I ain't worrying about what y'all think of me. What you think of me is your business. What I think of you, that's what's important. And how I treat you, to be in that position of neutrality, safe and protected, not to be at odds with anyone. How may I assist you is what Bill taught me. How may I be positioned to assist you? There's people in AA that didn't like me, and I would retaliate against them in meetings sometime. Bill told me the things you learn in AA are not weapons you use to attack people, they're tools you use to help them. Knock it off. And in later years, those very same people who opposed me felt free enough to come and ask me to help them, even though they knew that I knew what they said about me, because I didn't give them reason not to. I want to be positioned to be love and service in your life. I began to get those tools here. When I left after my fifth step, I went down to the club for the morning meeting, and I had made the mistake of telling somebody I was about to do my fifth step. You know, if you don't want something all over town, don't tell nobody in AA. And when I came to the club the morning after my fifth step, all those good people who had done this work and who were living this way of life was lined up, and they all hugged me when I came in, and they said, "We're so proud of you. Welcome, baby. Welcome to the work." Right? And on we go. 4 and 5. Right? Gotta look back to see what we need to do to go forward. And now I have some tools to use on a daily basis to help bring about this change that I want to occur, this change in ideas and motivations and the way that I react to life and the way that I react to you. I get all of that, and we move forward towards steps 6 and 7. I want to thank everybody for listening. I want to thank Jimmy for the invitation. God bless you. Bye-bye.